God.
And let me just share screen. There we go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to start the second chapter of the Mishneh Torah, which is kind of like a continuation of our previous discussion on the best way to come close to God is to learn and understand God. However, since God cannot be perceived directly, right? The human intellect is too limited to think in non-physical terms. The way we can train our minds to come closer is to study indirect knowledge of God, that being how the world that God created works. And then from that, we can learn how God functions in the world, how God provides in the world, how he leads the world. And that's a way for us to learn more about God. Okay? So in the second chapter, it says, Ha'el hanichbad ve'anora hazeh, right? This God that we spoke about previously, this tremendous, powerful, almighty God, Misvah le'ahavo ulira mimen. Right? We have two misvot. One is to love God, le'ahavo, and the other le'ira'a mimen, to fear God. Shne'emar ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, ve'ne'emar et Adonai Elohecha tira. Right? You shall love your God, right? Adonai Elohecha, right? Ve'ahavta, as you should love. This we say in the Shema. And the other one is Et Adonai Elohecha tira, right? You shall fear your God. And how do you learn to love and or to fear God? It says Ve'he'achi aderech le'ahavato. What is the path to loving God, ve'ira'ato, and also fearing him? בשעה שהתבונן האדם במעשיו וברואיו הנפלאים הגדולים ויראה מהם חוכמתו שאין לה ערך ולא כס, מיד הוא אוהב ומשבח ומפאר ומתאווה תאווה גדולה לידע השם הגדול. Right? So when a person comes and he starts to observe the actions of God, he starts to study science. He starts to study how this world works. And he sees how sophisticated they are. Or he comes to learn about the universe and he sees how immense it is. And he sees from that the wisdom that was put into these creations. And he sees that it's incomparable to anything that he's able to think of and to design, and it's way beyond human intellect. Miyad ohev umshabeach, right? So then he generates this love, umshabeach, and he prays towards God, umfaer umitave ta'ava gedona niddah Hashem hagadol, right? And this makes, this kind of generates a thirst within him to better know God, right? The more you study and the more you understand, the more you want to increase that knowledge and to come ever so closer to God. Kmo she'amar David, and this is what David said, Samea nafshi, right? My soul thirsts le'Elohim le'el Hai, right? To the living God. So it says, I once got into an argument with someone, and he says, yeah, so you sit on a nice mountain, but on a cliff, or on a nice, top of the mountain, and you see the sunset, and it's a beautiful sunset. It says you have to look at the simple the simple beauty of the world. He says, "B'sha'a she'yitbonen," at a time where a person, examines the world. It says, but the word "yitbonen" doesn't just mean to look. It doesn't say "b'sha'a she'istakel," at a time where a person views or sees. It says "yitbonen" is from the word "lehavin." You need to try to understand, and that is the first step in coming closer to God. Right? But then when you go even deeper into your understanding, Mehashev is also the same word used for calculating. He says, don't just understand it in theory, also, put the numbers together. Go into the mathematics behind it too. All of a sudden, he takes a step back, v'yira, and he has this fear, v'yivhad, v'yidah, because he has this acknowledgement, this understanding, shu beriya kitana, shefela afela, that he is a small, puny being that is very, very insignificant. Omed b'da'at kala, right, with his lower intellect, his lower understanding, me'uta nifnei temim de'ot, right? He says the man's intellect is incomparable to God's, right? And I'm standing now before this tremendous being, or this primary being that has all the knowledge of the universe. Kmo she'amar David, as David says, as I observe the heavens, right? I observe the skies, right? Yareach u'kochavim asher konanta, right? I see the stars and the moon, which you have established and set in place. It says, Ma enosh ki tizkerenu. How humbling this is, how I remember now that I am just a human being. Now, so this is the path, right? In order to, first of all, ignite some love for God, some thirst to understand God. And then as you acquire that knowledge, the more you acquire that knowledge, the more humbling it is for you in the presence of God. And that's the fear of God. The fear would be more called awe. How awesome God is compared to us as humans. So when I was having this discussion with someone, right, says, no, just you have to look at the plain beauty of the world around you. So, when you're just looking at something that you don't understand, you really miss a lot of it. If you really want to appreciate even a sunset or a rainbow, for instance, says someone who understands the rainbows, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you soon, he can appreciate the rainbow on a much higher level. All right, we have this halakha in Ilchot Shechita. Says, there's 5 things a person needs to know in order to be qualified to slaughter an animal. All right, and the halakha is that if a person isn't aware of these 5 things, even if he's slaughtered, and he says, and then afterwards you ask him, well, did you do derasa? Did you do shahiyah? And you explain to him what that is, and he says, no, I didn't do any of that stuff. All these things would make the animal tarif, and he says, no, I didn't do any of that stuff. He says, because he didn't in advance know these halachot, it says, kal milda de la ramya inish, anything that a person is not aware of, la vada'ateh. He says he can't pay attention to it. He says if you're not aware of something, even if it's your own action, even it's right before your eyes, but you didn't know to look out for it, it says you're going to completely miss it. And therefore, if you're not aware of these 5 halachot, of these 5 things, that if you do them during a shechita, then then it's not kasher, even if afterwards you're questioned about it, we can't really trust your opinion because you weren't aware of it to begin with. How do you know if you did shehiyah or did asa or any of those 5 things? All right. I want to play a little video for you. Anybody here ever hear of Walter Lewin? Walter Lewin, he was a physics professor in MIT, and all his lectures and all his classes are online. If anyone's interested, I really highly recommend his lectures on mechanics and on electrostatics and on thermodynamics. He has 3 full physics courses, MIT courses, available for free to the public. And they're fantastic courses because he also demonstrates everything in class. And he's, in my opinion, he's also a very charismatic teacher. He's an amazing teacher. He became very, very famous for teaching physics. This is a class, it's called For the Love of Physics. It's a lecture that he gave to the parents of his students. So I'm going to try to play it for you here. All right, it's about the rainbow.
Any of you, I should say, has ever seen?
By the way, could you all hear it well?
Oh, the sound is not good.
Yeah, it's not very good.
It's not good?
Rainbow.
Let's see if there's a way to increase it, but I don't think so. Maybe if I do this.
For me, if I just increase the sound on my own end, I can hear it.
At least that's what you think. I bet you've never seen one.
Is it any better now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, just like you've looked at art. You've never seen art unless you were educated. After today, your life will change because I will make you see for the first time in your life the rainbows. Unless you have already watched my lectures on rainbows, it's popular. And so these 6 questions, you can see how well you know rainbows. The first question is, what is the radius of a rainbow? And what I mean by that is the following. A rainbow is a circle, right? Something like this. So somewhere, perhaps below the horizon, is the center of that circle. And so the question now is, what is this radius in degrees? Or is it not always the same? Then comes the issue of the color sequence. If you see a rainbow, is the red always on the inside or always on the outside? Or does that depend on the time of the day of the week? Have you ever noticed that there is an enormous difference in the brightness of the sky between here and there? And if so, where is it bright and where is it dark? Have you ever noticed the second bow? And if you have noticed it, where do you look for the second bow? And then comes the question, what is the color sequence of the second bow? Is it the same as the primary bow, is the bright one, or is it reversed? Who can answer all those 6 questions, by the way? You've seen my lectures, right? Only one person. That's an insult. Only one person has seen my lectures. Who can answer 5 questions? 5, 4, 3, 2. Who can only answer 1 question? I won't embarrass the rest of you. Still, right?
So who can answer 6 questions? Have any of you paid attention to all of those things you spoke about? I'll give you an example.
I try to see the 6 questions, but I think I missed them.
All right, so some of the questions is, what is the color sequence of the rainbow? Have you ever noticed that
Brightness.
the brightness in the sky above the rainbow and below it is very different? Has anybody ever noticed that? Has anybody ever searched for a secondary rainbow?
Yeah,
what
sometimes
is
you
the
have
color
like
sequence?
this and that. But,
Right. So you have one rainbow.
yeah, and
You have
then
a color sequence with the red on the
also.
bottom. Below it, the sky is very dark. Above it, it's very bright.
Yeah.
Above it, it's very dark. Then you have a secondary rainbow, and the color sequence of the secondary rainbow is reversed. And that's the darkest part in the sky, is between the primary and the secondary rainbow.
Like a mirror.
And then, exactly like a mirror, and then you have the sequence, and then the sky beyond the secondary rainbow is bright again. So who has noticed these things before? I have never noticed that before I saw this lecture. But once you see the lecture and you're aware of all of this, then a rainbow, it's not, you don't see the rainbows that you saw before anymore. You see something much deeper. And when you listen to the lecture, it's an hour-long lecture on the physics behind the rainbow, you learn to appreciate the rainbow on a much, much deeper level.
Can you put the on a line on our group, the lecture?
I'll share the full lecture. Yes, I'll share.
Yeah.
Over here, this is just my lecture in Hebrew. Where I played that part in the lecture. But I'll send the full lecture,
Thank you.
the full rainbow lecture, right? And at the end of the class, I'll bring his last few minutes, a summary of that lecture. So he says, the Rambam says, so in accordance with this, where the deeper your understanding of the world is, then the deeper your appreciation for God's wisdom is, right? This brings you closer. So I want to just explain a few things about this world, all right? Just to ignite this, to give you this first spark at the love of God and the fear/awe of God. It says, "ולפי הדברים האלו אני מבאר כללים גדולים ממעשה ריבון העולמים." All right, so I want to explain a few things, a few general rules as how this world that God created functions. כדי שיהיו פתח למבין לאהוב את השם. Right, it'll just be like opening the doorstep, just letting you stick your foot in the doorway towards this quest of knowledge of God. כמו שאמרו חכמים בעניין אהבה, right, as the Hachamim say regarding the mitzvah of the love of God, שמתוך כך אתה מכיר את מי שאמר והיה העולם. Right, from studying these topics, right, you get to know he who spoke or uttered words and brought the world into existence. Okay, so let's start with the first general rule. כל מה שברא הקדוש ברוך הוא בעולמו נחלק לשלושה חלקים. He says the world is divided, all creation is divided into 3 categories. מהם ברואים שמחוברים מגולם וסורה. All right, so from those 3 categories, one of them are those that are made up of a physical matter. Visura, and surah is some sort of essential characteristic to them. For instance, this is something that repeats itself a lot in Maimonidean and also classic philosophy, is this idea of a surah, right? An essential characteristic. What does that mean? Okay, so we have, let's say, a table, right? A table has many different characteristics to it. It could be made of wood, it could be made of plastic, it could be made of glass, right? It could be brown, it could be white, it could be transparent, right? These are all characteristics of the table. But none of these characteristics are essential to the table. It could have 4 legs, it could have 3 legs, it could have 1 leg that spreads out on the bottom. All these things don't make or break the table. What is the essential characteristic of the table? Is that it has a flat top and it's elevated above the ground so that a person can sit comfortably around it and place things on it. All right, so all those non-essential characteristics are called mikre, or loosely translated, we'll call it what's the word? I forgot the word. But it's not essential to the table. I'm not gonna waste time on figuring out the word. The essential characteristic of the table is what we call the surah. So he says the first category is anything that's made up of physical matter and has also some sort of essential characteristic to it, has an essence to it. All right, and these things, or this first category, vehem nehivim v'nifsadim tamid, these things, they come into existence and they go out of existence all the time. Like a table, which is constructed, right? It has its physical matter and it has its essence to it. But then you burn the table and it doesn't function anymore as a table. Or you break it and it doesn't function anymore as a table. So they come in and out of existence all the time. Kimo gufot ha'adam, like man, or the body of man. V'habehema, and the animals, v'atzimachim, v'matachot, right? And how do you call it? Precious stone, metals, and vegetation. That's one category. And the other one, also they're made up of physical matter, and they also have an essence to it. However, they don't transition between different forms, and they don't change their essence. Right? But their essence is instilled, it's constant in their body, in their physical form, and they never change, like the previous category. Right? And this is talking about the stars, right? And their matter is not the same as the matter of everything else that we know that does change. And neither is their essence similar to the essence of any other physical form that we know. I'd say in modern science, we no longer think of this second category as a real thing. We know that stars too come in and out of existence, and so their bodies change and they disappear. That they're born and they die, just like anything else. And the third category, umehem beruin surah bilo golem kilal. All right, there are those things that God created that have no physical form at all, and they only have, call it an essence, what we call its abstract essence. It's not attached to any physical form, such as the Hema Malachim. And these are what we call the Malachim, right? 3 Malachim came and spoke to Abraham, right? In this past week's parasha, they have no physical form, these malachim. Shamalachim enam guf ugviyah. These malachim, they have no body and they have no physical form. Ella surot nifradot zo mizo. They are only intellects or abstractions that are separated one from the other. All right. Does that make sense to anybody? I had a very difficult time with this.
Understand, you
It's
just
okay.
said,
Sorry?
are these three angels that came to Abraham, they had no physical?
Right, so it says angels. Angels are beings that have no physical form.
Yes, but Abraham ran to give them the food, so they
Oh,
must
okay,
have.
you're talking specifically about Abraham's vision, right? It's very explicit at the beginning if you read carefully. It says, Vayira Adonai Abraham, right? And God appeared before Abraham. And he's sitting, right? He's sitting at the entrance of his tent at the heat of day, and then it says, in Abraham, and then then Abraham had a vision. And what was this vision? This vision was all of a sudden there are three people standing above him, three figures standing above him, right? So it's very easy to miss if you don't observe, right? If you don't read it carefully. And this is one of the great things that
So how did they eat? But he went to prepare food for them.
What's that?
He went to prepare food for them.
Right, but that was all part of his vision.
Oh,
That was a
because
prophetic vision.
I read somewhere that one of the angels was a healing angel. So as he
Right.
ran, he was healed.
Okay, so now let's try to understand this differently. Okay, so now that we know that angels have no physical form, and everything that was described in that story was actually a vision, like a dream that Abraham had, meaning this is where the first verse is saying that God appeared before Abraham. How did God appear before Abraham? The whole next chapter is describing this appearance of God before Abraham, this prophetic vision of three angels, one of them being, you said, the Raphael, right? A healing angel. What is a healing angel? It's health. It's an abstract concept of health and medicine. Meaning when God appeared before Abraham and healed him, Abraham perceived this as an angel of health, of healing. All right, but that's already going off our topic. So he says this third category is like abstract concepts, put it that way. Some sort of essence that's not attached to any physical form. And then he says, wait, okay, so how do you call it? The Torah is giving us detailed descriptions of how these angels look. It says it's made of fire. It has wings, right? Right? These are all part of the prophetic vision of any prophet who describes these things. What does it mean? Esh ubal kenafayim. What is fire? Fire is light. It goes up. Bal kenafayim, it flies. Right? So what's it trying to teach us? It says lomar she'en guf ve'eno kaved kagufot hakevedim. It says it has no physical form. It has no mass. And so it's not something that's weighed down because we perceive things that fly as light. So when the prophets come to describe the angels, they say they fly. It's not that they actually fly, it's that they have no physical form. So they have no mass, they have no weight to them. Right? It says the same thing about God. He says, God your Lord is a consuming fire. God's not a fire. God has no physical form either. Ve'eno esh ela mashal. Right? God is not fire. This is just a parable. וכמו שנאמר, עושה מלאכיו רוחות, and the rest is משרתיו אש לוהט. Right? God makes his servants, malachav, his malachim, they are winds. Misharetav and his servants, esh lohed, burning fire. So wait, is it wind or is it fire? So it's neither. They have no physical form.
Is it like spiritual insight?
Spiritual insight. In other words, an abstract understanding
Yeah.
or concept.
Yes.
Exactly. Wait a
Okay,
minute.
no, I understand. Thank you.
Pleasure. But in the previous chapter, we said God has no physical form. How do we know that God has no physical form? Or how do we know that God is one? Does anybody remember our line of reasoning over there?
The 13 principles of faith.
Right, so one of the 13, but what was the line of reasoning that brought us to understand that God can't possibly be multiple in any way or divisible in any way?
Because he is not dependent on anything else.
Right, he is not dependent on anything else, but how do
Mm.
we know that he is one? We said,
Having faith,
sorry?
having faith in him and knowing that he is the only, there is no other.
No, he is one because he can't be anything else. Why can't he be anything else other than one?
There's
I don't
nothing to
expect you
compare.
really to remember. It needs to be reviewed over and over again to really understand it. But we said, because we see that the energy and the force invested in the universe is infinite. And if it's infinite, it's coming from an infinite source. And if it's coming from an infinite source, there can't be more than one of them because they would be limiting each other. Wait, so there can't be more than one, and therefore you can't be in a physical form. Say, okay, but so God, there can only be one God, right? There can only be one God because he's infinite, it means he's non-physical. Then how is it that there are multiple angels that are non-physical? That kind of contradicts everything we said in that first chapter. It says, "Ubamei paredu asurot zo mizo." Right, so how then can you differentiate between these non-physical intellects, right? Because they have no physical structure to them, they have no limits to them. Says lefi she'enan shavin bimtziutan. Says they are not equal in their reality. What does that mean?
Question. Could it be that, because you were talking about photons, you were talking about light energy.
Right.
So the source of light, and it radiates photons. So photons are what we perceive as light emanating from a source,
Okay.
and that source is singular. So could it be that the angels, since they are an idea, a concept, and photons, they don't have any mass either. I haven't really seen
You trying to
how
connect
you,
between the two?
yeah. So could that
Perhaps.
could that be something that you have the source of the light and then you have the emanation, the photons
Okay.
that emanate from that light?
All right, but how does that answer our question though? About
But that's
how
the
can there be multiple things with no physical boundaries? Right? When we saw previously that any two things on the same plane of existence limit each other and therefore have boundaries, have physical form and limited power and energy. And we see that there's infinite power and energy, therefore there can only be one God who has no physical form. So the Rambam says it's very simple. You said any two things on the same plane of existence limit each other, but they're not on the same plane of existence. Right? If we go back to our parable of Mashal of Harry Potter, right? There's the reader, right? You, and then there's Harry Potter and all his friends. They're on a completely different plane of existence. So he says, these angels all exist on a different plane of existence. He said, it's as if God is imagining us, keeping us in mind that we get our existence, right? So it says, says each one of these angels is on a different level of existence and exists below. It's not a physical right up and down or above and below, but exists below the previous angel's level. And he exists kind of like from the imagination of the one above it. And that one would exist because of the existence given to him or imagined by the one above it. And they all come from that one source, the sun in your parable, right? From that one source, the primary being, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, Vetuvo, and his goodness. What is this Vetuvo? It's this life that God is, what we call this in Hebrew, we call it Shefa. You know what Shefa is? Shefa is like an overflow. Like if you're filling up a glass of water, right? And it reaches the top and you continue pouring, it's gonna flow outwards, right? Overflow, and you're gonna spill everywhere. Right? That's why a lot of people, when they do Havdalah or Kiddush, they say pour the wine until it overflows. Why? This way it's a sign of excess, of blessing, of beracha, of shefa. Right? So we also call all of existence or anything that God radiates towards us, we call it his shefa, his overflow. How does this overflow work? Says, well, think of it this way. It's another parable. Think you have the system of, let's say, buckets, all right? You fill one up, right? It fills up to the top, and it overflows to fill up the next one. And when that one reaches the top, it overflows to fill up the next one. All right? And this water that reaches, let's say, the 10th bucket and fills it up down the line, that water came from that one source that overflowed from the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one, and so on and so on. Right? Vehakol, so all of it comes from God. Vetuvo. Vezehu sheramas Shlomo bechokmato, and this is what Shlomo HaMelech was hinting to in his wisdom when he says, Ki gaboha me'al gaboha shomer ugvohim alehem. Right? He says there's this hierarchy between the angels, right? One is existence, is dependent on the one above him, and another one, right? One above and above and above, gavoa me'al gavoa, shomer, provide, presides, watches over. Because this is all coming from that one gavoa that's on top of all of them.
Is
And
that
now-
the difference between the angels, that if an angel is dependent upon an angel in a higher realm, then that's the difference between them?
Right, right.
Okay.
It's a different level
So-
of existence. However, don't confuse this with the angels that we're usually used to talking about. All right,
Mhm.
this is the truth is in the guide for the perplexed, the Rambam brings maybe 11 different definitions or 11 different things that we use the word malach for.
Mhm.
All right, one of them is these different levels of existence, and we're going to go
Mhm.
through them soon.
Is
Right?
this mythical?
I'm not familiar with this. I'm not familiar with different definitions
Right, like we
definitions of
said,
angels, or
Abraham
how we
saw
usually talk about
Raphael,
angels.
and the Midrash also says that there's Raphael, and then there's Gabriel, and there's this. There's not necessarily the same type of angel that we're talking about over here, being different levels of existence entirely.
Does
Right?
it have to do with science, scientific understanding?
That's a good question. I'm not really going to address it so much now. Scientific understanding would be like part of this system,
Mm-hmm.
but not the different levels.
Mhm.
This that we say one is below the other. We're not talking about up and down in location, right? One sitting above the other. Or I have two boys, they sleep in bunk beds, one sleeps above the other. That's not what we're talking about over here. Ela, it's more like right? It's like we say in two wise men, that one is greater than the other. One's wisdom is greater than the other. It's not a physical greatness, it's an intellectual greatness. And same way that we say about a cause is above the effect. What does it mean it's above? We also say it's before. It's not before necessarily in time, and it's not above in place. It's the cause of something, so it comes, so to speak, before it. All right, and then they have names. These different levels have names. שינוי שמות המלאכים על שם מעלתם היא, ולפיכך נקראים חיות הקודש, והן למעלה מן הכל, אופנים וארנים וחשמלים וסרפים. He says these are the different names of these malachim. He says there are 10 of them, 10 of these intermediary levels between man's existence, our lowly physical existence, and the primary being. All right, so the one highest are called Hayot HaKodesh, right? The animals of the Kodesh. And they are above all of them. And below them, there is the Ofanim. What is the Ofanim? Ofanim actually means like cycles or wheels. Why are they called Ofanim? Well, because when Yehezkel has the vision of the structure of the heavens, right, not the physical heavens, but the non-physical heavens, the angel world, he sees a great chariot, right? The chariot has these wheels. And that's what the Ofan is. And the Hayot are the ones pulling the chariot, right? This is all the Mashal, right? There is no actual chariot up there that God rides, right? But when the prophet envisions God, he envisions him on this chariot. And each part of these chariots is a different level of malach. So it says there's the hayot, right? The beasts. And they're above all of them because they're pulling the whole thing, the whole system. There's the ofanim, there's the wheels, right, that allows it to move forward. Ve'erenim, it's another name. V'hashmanim, v'serafim, u'malachim, ve'elohim. One of the levels of the malachim is called Elohim. Uvnei Elohim. And the level below it are called Bnei Elohim, the sons of Elohim. Ve'keruvim. Right? These are maybe the most commonly known one, the Keruvim and the Ishim. The Ishim is the lowest level of Malachim. Ishim actually means like person, people, sort of. But it's not humans. It says, Kol elu asara shemot shenikre'u behem malachim, al shem eser ma'alot shelahem hem. All right, all these 10 names are named after their levels of existence. Ma'ala she'en lema'ala mimena el ma'alat ha'el baruch hu, right? But the highest level that there is none above it, ma'alat asurot shenikret hayot, right, is the level that we refer to as the hayot, the beasts, the ones pulling that chariot. Nefichach ne'emar b'nebuah, therefore, in the prophecy of Yehezkel, where he views the Merkavah, says Shehen Tahat HaKiseh. It says about them, the Hayot, that they are under the throne. What does it mean under the throne? It means they are under God. Umala Asirit, right? But the 10th level, the lowest one, Hi Ma'alat HaSurah Shenikret Ishim, right? That is the one that we refer to as Ishim, Vehem HaMalachim שמדברים עם הנביאים ונראים להם במראה הנבואה. Right? And these are the malachim that speak and communicate with man. These are the ones that the prophets see or speak to or communicate with, and that's why they are called Ishim. By the way, another code term for when you're studying Torah is when it says Ha'ish, the man, the person, it's usually talking about a prophet. Why a prophet? It says Ish HaElohim, it's talking about Moshe. It says Ish, the man of God. When he uses the word Ish, it's either talking about a very important person, but usually it's talking about a prophet, someone who speaks to these Ishim. Nefichach nikre'u Ishim. That's why they are called Ishim. Shema'alatam kerova mima'alat da'at ha'adam. Right? Because their level, their existence is closest to that of man's intellect. It's still beyond man's intellect. However, that is the closest one to man's intellect. וכל הsurat ha'elu hayim u'mekirim et haboreh. Right, and all of these surot, these essences, these abstractions, these intellects, it says Hayim, they live umekirim, and they know et haboreh, right? The Creator. It says Hayim et haboreh. They live the Creator. What does that mean? They live the Creator, or they know the Creator. It says your knowledge is your life. If there is nothing physical, then your life is this shefa that's coming out from God. And what is this shefa? It's this knowledge that's coming out of God. So life isn't you're either alive or dead. Life is your closeness to God, your understanding of God. And what differentiates the different levels of malachim is how much life they have, how much knowledge they have of God. And they know God with an immense amount of knowledge. Every single surah, every malach, in accordance to its level, to its degree, and he's emphasizing again, lo lefi godlo, not in accordance to its size, because it has no physical dimensions. אפילו מעלה הראשונה אינה יכולה להשיג אמיתת הבורא כמו שהיא. But even the highest level is unable to perceive God as he is. Remember, as Moshe Rabbeinu asked to perceive God, not only was Moshe Rabbeinu's intellect too limited to perceive that, even the highest level of Malach is too limited to perceive that. but מסגת ויודעת יותר ממה שמסגת ויודעת צורה שלמטה ממנה. However, it has a much deeper and higher perception of God than the level that's below it. וכן כל מעלה ומעלה עד מעלה עשירית. And so to every single level until that 10th lowliest level called the Ishim. ומעלה עשירית גם היא יודעת הבורא. And even that lowest level knows, right, knows the creator. דעה שאין כוח בני אדם המחוברים לגולם וצורה יכול להשיג ולדע כמותה. Right, even that lowest level, the Ishim, the one that communicates with man, has a perception of God that man, who is limited by his physical form, cannot perceive. והכל אינן יודעין את הבורא כמו שהוא יודע עצמו. And nobody can perceive God the way God perceives himself. Because all that knowledge that comes from God, right? God is the only possessor of all of it. Everyone else just received from part of what the previous one possesses. כל הנמצאים חוץ מן הבורא מסורה ראשונה יתוש קטן שהם בטבור הארץ, הכל מכוח אמיתו נמסר. Right? And everything in creation, all creatures, all beings, from this Hayot HaKodesh, right, the highest level of Malachim, the most complete intellect after God, all the way down to a lowly Yetush. A Yetush is a mosquito that, you know, that annoys you when you're sitting on the ground. Hakol mikoach amito nimsau. They all come from this shefa that comes forward, this overflow of life and knowledge that came from the source being God himself, from his level of existence. And because he knows himself, meaning all that water in that system, all that overflow that came from him, he knows all of that. And he knows its greatness and its glory and its truthness. He knows everything. And nothing that escapes his knowledge and his vision. Basically, if something exists, it needs to be in God's knowledge, otherwise it can't possibly exist. And so if anything happens, that's part of God's knowledge. And we'll get into that much more in a much later class when we discuss the topic of freedom of choice, which was started in the previous semester. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mikir amito. He knows his truthness, his level of existence. V'yodea ota kemot shehi, and he knows it as it is. V'no yodea b'dea sheyichus mimenu kmo she'anu yodin. Right? And he doesn't know it in a knowledge that's external to himself, the way that we know things. How do we know things? You don't know it by looking inwards. We need to study things that are external to us. When we study something external to us, we acquire knowledge. Knowledge that wasn't part of our knowledge beforehand. Right? שאין אנו ודעתנו אחד. We and our knowledge are not one and united. We need to acquire it from the outside. אבל הבורא, right, but the creator, God himself, who ודעתו, right, him and his knowledge, וחייו and his life, אחד, is one. מכל צד ומכל פינה. If you remember, we mentioned this before. We said we perceive knowledge and life, and I'll go back to the topic of this chapter, the mitzvah of love, right? We perceive these things as three completely different things. He says, what is love? Well, love is a function of knowledge. The more you know someone, the more you can love them. The more you know God, the more you can love him. Just a function of knowledge. What is life? Life is that same function of knowledge that came from God. So really, these things are all one thing. We perceive it differently, but it all radiates from God as one thing. This life, the more love, the more knowledge you acquire of this life, the more you live and the more you love. Because if God would live with life and with knowledge separately, there'd be many different gods who, him himself, v'hayav, and his life, v'da'ato, and his knowledge. There would be three separate things. Says, but they are not, because God is one. So all this coming out from God is one. ואין הדבר כן אלא אחד מכל צד ומכל פינה ובכל דרך ייחוד. Right, so you can add this to your meditation in the Shema of understanding the singularity and the unity of God, is that even the concepts of anything basically that comes out of God really narrows down to one thing that God is projecting into the world. It's life, it's knowledge, it's love itself. All of this is one thing. God is one in every possible way. All right, we'll do this one last paragraph. Right, so you see, he is the knower, and he is the known, and he is knowledge itself. Hakol echad, it is all one. God's knowledge, God's active knowledge, and God's being known. It is all one thing. Right, and this is a very deep understanding that is really can't possibly be fully encompassed by man's understanding, by man's intellect. And therefore in the Torah we say Hey Paro, right? The life of Paro, Hey Nafshecha, right? Your life. And we don't say Hey Hashem, right? The life of God. We say Ela Hay Hashem. God's alive. You say the life of Paro, the life of your soul, the life of this, but there's no life of God, because God is life itself. Hay Hashem. The Od Harbe, and many other examples like this, because God, she'ena boreh v'hayav shenayim, k'mo hayeh hagufot ha'chayim, because God's life is not separate from his being the way any other physical being is. Okay, hayah malachim, or even like the life of the malachim, who receive their life externally, right, from whichever level comes above them. And I would just like to play the ending of this lecture. Let's see.
Next time you see the rainbow, you will look at it very differently. You will check on the outlet of the primary bow, and you will search for the secondary bow, which is about 10 degrees higher in the sky. You will also make sure that the color sequence of the secondary is reversed. And you will make sure that the inside of the bow, that the sky is much brighter than on the outside of the primary bow. And for sure, you will try to see Alexander's dark band. This is like the disease. You can't resist it. And it's all my fault. I cannot cure you anymore. It's too late for that. This is a disease for life. But all this joy and fun that you will get over and above the everlasting beauty of the bows, but you will see much more than people who do not have the knowledge that you have now. And therefore the experience for them will be rather shallow. Knowledge always adds. Knowledge never subtracts. Knowledge is hidden beauty. Your life will never be the same. See you on Friday.
Send the link of the entire lecture to Bracha to pass on. And once you acquire this knowledge and come closer to God, you experience life on a much more profound level. And that is how life and love and knowledge really in the end are all one thing. So the more knowledge you acquire, the more life you acquire. Any questions?
Yeah, I have heard for Judaism, it is not good to look at all at the rainbow, especially not the whole one. You can look at one end and not the other. Do you know?
There's no law like that. I could see how people developed that idea from the rainbow being a sign that God wants to wipe out the earth, like in the times of Noah, and therefore you should avoid looking at the rainbow. But there is no law like that, and I don't know where that developed from. I've never actually heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard it also. I've heard that you can't paint a rainbow either.
You can't paint a rainbow?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with
Like-
such a rule.
Okay.
Maybe it's Kabbalistic. I would
Maybe.
have another question. You mentioned Moshe Rabbeinu in comparison to the other angels, if I can
Right.
say. What is the difference? Did Moshe Rabbeinu had an exceptional perception of Hashem more than the angels or lower?
No, so it would be a lower level than the angels. Yet a higher perception. Well, the truth is it's not a black and white. I'll tell you why. When a person becomes a prophet, he becomes an ish, right? we say the Ishin, the lowest level, are those that communicate. But on a more profound level, since we'll learn this when we study about prophecy, a person actually becomes an Ish. And so he's spectrum than something concrete. I hope I didn't confuse you even more. Simply, Moshe's perception cannot exceed that of the angels because he is limited by a physical form and the angels aren't. However, even the angels' perceptions are limited by whatever level is above them. And even the highest level of angels, the Hayot, also have a limited understanding of God, although it can't even be compared to our understanding. If someone else wanted to ask something?
I don't know. I feel a little confused. I know.
That's good.
Okay. So I know Moshe Rabbeinu was considered between a man and an angel, and that seems to be the goal of a lot of religions, is to get to that higher state beyond human
Right.
perception. But well, I guess okay, never mind. I guess the merits to being here is free will. That's the merit of being this limited in wisdom.
Right.
But
And Moshe Rabbeinu was actually referred to in the Torah, in the book of Devarim. He's actually referred to as a malach.
What do you mean? As an angel?
Yes.
Okay.
When God says,
I
I'm
did
going to
read
send
somewhere
my
that
angel before you, and you should listen to everything he says, he's talking about Moshe.
Yeah, I heard one of the interpretation of a psalm saying that he reached the level of an angel. Yeah.
Maybe I'll give a class one day on that, on the story of the Garden of Eden, of tree of life and the tree of knowledge, and we'll analyze it in accordance with what we're learning here today. We'll give you more insights into what are the kiruvim that are mentioned there, and the lahat ha'chelev ha'mitapechet. The kiruvim holding that sword. Those are two different levels of angels, and how there are obstacles to the tree of life, which Moshe overcame.
That will be very interesting.
But what are the merits of our limited knowledge? Because we can't really go beyond it.
Well, first let's try to get to our full capacity. We have a long way to go. Anything else? Any other questions?
I have a question. Well,
Yes, please.
first I wanted to. So, if I understood you correctly, the view that you've been explaining is that our intellect can be seen as a separate. It can be separated, and
It's external to us, our intellect.
yeah,
Because our intellect itself, our acquired intellect, the actual
Yeah.
knowledge is God.
yeah, and that intellect, that knowledge, is coming from the different levels of the
Right.
different angels that are dependent upon the angel that is above them, and above that is Hashem. That is just one. He's not dependent on anyone. He has the knowledge, like from him. There's the knowledge coming. That's the light. That's the water in the buckets that you were talking about. And also, if we take it down to us as individuals, we get our intellect if we're gonna make it like relatable, you are a child in school and you get intellect from a teacher. So
Right.
you are given something from the teacher that you cannot touch, but you're still given something,
Right.
and that is external to yourself. Now,
Right.
a question that I have is, usually people talk about how your intellect and your emotion can war with each other. So can emotion or our emotional life and our intellectual life, they can be at war with each other with decisions and what we're feeling versus what we know. Can emotion also be separated, or is that something that is more internal?
Okay, so the emotion itself is internal because it's dependent very much on our physical being, on our physical side. A prophet, by the way, is somebody who's able to properly harmonize between his intellect and his emotion. We'll study that when we get to the prophets later on in the course. So if you haven't perfected yourself to the level of a prophet, with nobody really has that I know at least, then you
No,
may
I'm
have
far
some
away from that.
tension between your intellect and your emotions. But the idea is we're going to try to perfect ourselves to a state where they both actually live in harmony with each other. Anything else? More questions?
Was it that was so you were talking about the vision of Abraham, the two angels. Is that why it was a vision, that the vision is conveyed to us through intellect?
Sorry, could you repeat that last part again?
So the vision of Abraham.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I get notifications from anyways. What was I saying? So the prophets, those who are true prophets, they get their visions through their intellect.
Right.
That was a really bad way of saying it, but I was thinking about the example of Abraham and the two angels,
right,
and how and that is a vision that he has.
So what happens, I mean, we'll discuss this a lot more in depth when we get to prophecy. And what happens is, like, God communicates through intellect, and man's receives this message. However, man cannot synthesize like the pure intellect. Man synthesizes the message through his emotion and imagination. Like they kind of come together.
Oh, so is imagination also something that is separate? So do you have intellect, imagination, and emotion?
Yes, because your imagination is based on your actual perception of the world around you. You can't imagine something that you haven't perceived, or you could put together different things that you've perceived, but you can't imagine something that is completely disconnected from anything you've ever perceived.
And is that also analyzed and theorized in philosophy, just like the intellect is within Jewish like hashkafa?
So the imagination part comes from man's physical being, same way that emotions do.
I have a question on that. Just Virgo.
Yeah, please.
So if imaginations are only possible in the limit of our knowledge, what about our dream? Sometimes we dream which with things like it's beyond our imagination, then can we assume it means something, like there dreams, which means nothing, obviously.
Right. So we say Halamot Shav Yidaberu. We say even false dreams Yidaberu. They speak. They speak to us. We keep going down the path of prophecy, right? Imagination can only, you can only imagine things that either you've perceived directly or you're putting things together. For instance, you've never seen a ship, a huge ship, let's say an aircraft carrier, the aircraft carrier itself flying in the skies. You've never seen that before. However, you can imagine it because you've seen things fly in the sky and you've seen aircraft carriers before, right? These huge ships, or you've seen pictures of it. But you can't imagine something that's completely disconnected from anything you've ever seen. Part of what imagination does is it puts things together. It also does the opposite. It breaks things apart.
Thank you.
No.
I have one more question.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I was thinking about imagination, emotion, and intellect. And I was thinking about how we as human beings we can view something. Everyone can view the same video or the same talk, and we can still get, each person can get a small little variation of what was told or taught or shown.
Right.
So
You
is
could be
that
looking at the same thing.
influenced
We'll
by,
experience two different things completely.
yeah, so is that influenced by our imagination and our emotion? So, because I was thinking about how people can, for instance, the horrific events that are unfolding right now in Israel, how people can have such different views of something where the
Right.
information is out there. For just as an example.
I'll give you an example. When I was young, I was on a bus at school. I was like in elementary school, and we had guards that come to escort us on our school trips. And there were these two guards. They were, I don't know, maybe in their 20s, and I was maybe 10. They were sitting in front of me, and one is talking to the other, and he says, "You know what they found? Biologists, they found this snake that has remnants of legs on it." And I'm thinking to myself as a 10-year-old, like, oh my God, that's so cool. They actually found like the serpent from the Garden of Eden, right? Obviously, that's not what they said. The other one responded to me, says, oh my God, you know what that is? That's evidence of evolution. And I'm like, what? So, anybody, you can read the same newspaper, go read the same facts, read the same anything. The truth is, there's no such thing as objective knowledge. There are facts, and everyone can interpret it completely different. And I would think it also has to do kind of with a person's imagination, because it's part of a person's past experiences or other things that he knows. So it's kind of like a mix of his intellect and his imagination or his emotion. Everyone has their own way of interpreting the world around them.
Yeah. I thought that story was really funny. It was a good story.
Anything else, anybody?
This is secondary question on what you're talking about, your experience. Don't you think that evolution theory and the faith, the Torah can go together?
I don't think they contradict each other. Not only that, I don't think that the serpent in the story of the Garden of Eden was an actual serpent. As I grew and studied, I realized that too is kind of like a parable slash sort of like a prophetic vision.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
But that's something to be discussed in a maybe much later class.